The National Defence University of Malaysia, or UPNM, is not an easy place to get into. Cadets are carefully selected, often for their discipline, academics, or potential to lead. Many arrive with the dream of serving the nation, either in the Army, Navy, or the Air Force. Parents see it as a badge of honor, their children chosen to join an institution that blends higher education with military training. Life here is orderly, almost down to the minute. Cadets have to balance the demands of a full-time university student while also undergoing military training. For those who endure the routine, a bright future awaits. A respected career in the armed forces, path of service, and a life built on honor. This was the world that 21-year-old Zulfarhan Osman lived in as a third-year electrical engineering student and naval cadet in 2017. A place where brotherhood and duty was supposed to protect him. But instead of safety, Zulfarhan faced violence and unimaginable hurt. Accused of stealing a laptop, he was dragged by his peers, beaten, and burned repeatedly with a steam iron. For days, the violence continued inside the very dormitories meant to house future defenders of the nation. And in the end, it wasn't an enemy from outside the gates that killed him, but the people he trusted the most, his fellow cadets. Today on Side Notes, we look at the case of Zulfarhan Osman and the series of events that turned a prestigious institution into the site of an unthinkable tragedy. The following episode contains mentions of death and descriptions of violent events, including bodily harm. Viewer discretion is advised. This retelling is based on publicly available information, including court records, news reports, and historical accounts. If you appreciate the story, do like and subscribe and let us know in the comments. So, who was Zulfarhan, the central figure of our story? Friends described him as polite and soft-spoken, the kind of person who didn't raise his voice and who always respected his elders. At home, he was the eldest of 4 children, a son his parents could rely on, a brother his siblings looked up to. His family was close-knit, and like many parents in Malaysia, his mother and father wanted the best possible future for him. But when Zulfarhan told them he wanted to join the National Defence University of Malaysia, his mother, Hawa Osman, hesitated. She worried about the demands of military life, the pressure, the rigid system, and the fear that he might not be able to spend time with family. She had had 2 miscarriages before Zulfarhan came into their lives, so she was always a little protective of him. Still, Zulfarhan was determined, and his parents eventually gave their blessings. In many ways, UPNM at Sungai Besi Camp in Kuala Lumpur offered a structured, disciplined life. Students woke up at 5 a.m. for Subuh prayers, followed by roll call. Lectures ran from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m, and during this time, cadets were not allowed in the hostels unless granted permission. They were expected to be in faculties or the library. After classes, students had mandatory sports like swimming, boxing, or martial arts. At 7:15 p.m, cadets would prepare for Maghrib prayers, followed by a religious sermon and Isha prayers. Nights were spent completing assignments or revision with lights out at midnight. Weekends were for military training, where cadets took on physical and academic challenges and tactical exercises. And while they received a monthly salary, around 1,800 ringgit a month, they rarely had time to enjoy it because of their demanding schedule. It was supposed to be an environment that built resilience, a brotherhood, a place where cadets protected each other. But for Zulfarhan, that same environment became the setting for something far darker, a culture where silence could be deadly, and where loyalty was twisted into complicity. And that culture would soon set the stage for the events that led to his death. The nightmare began in the early hours of May 21st, 2017. Inside the Jabat hostel at UPNM, Zulfarhan Osman was dragged from his room by his peers. He was accused of stealing a laptop. Reports shared that a fellow cadet, whose father was a BOMO, had made the accusation. It was unfounded, but what followed was far worse. Between 2:30 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., fellow cadets restrained him in room 305. There, they pressed a steam iron onto his skin. It was dragged along his torso, arms and legs, burning his flesh. Besides the iron, they also beat him with a belt, a rubber hose, and a hanger. The torture left deep, raw wounds across his body. The next night, 22nd May, he was moved to room 410, and it happened again. From 1:30 a.m. to 5:45 a.m., the torture continued. Zulfarhan was burned, whipped, and struck repeatedly, while his hands and legs were tied. They relentlessly assaulted him, wanting to force Zulfarhan that he had stolen the laptop, but he once again denied stealing it. By 27 May, 5 days after the torture, Zulfarhan's condition was worsening. 4 of his abusers accompanied him to a clinic in Bangi where they met Dr. Asfar Hussain. The cadets told the doctor that Zulfarhan had been injured in an explosion during army training at camp. Without suspecting anything, Dr. Asfar examined him and he was alarmed. The burns were severe and he insisted that Zulfarhan seek treatment at a hospital. But Zulfarhan, maybe afraid of what might follow if the truth emerged, declined. He told the doctor he could manage with simple dressings. 4 days later, on 31st May, Zulfarhan returned to the clinic, now with 2 of his abusers. This time, he appeared weaker, fatigued, and dehydrated. Dr. Asfar again urged him to go to the hospital immediately, but Zulfarhan replied that his condition was improving and only asked that the wounds on his thigh and backside be cleaned and bandaged. After that, instead of returning to the dormitory, the cadets transferred him to a condominium unit in Bangi. They said it was so he could rest and recover, but really it was to keep the abuse hidden from the eyes of other students and university authorities. The next day, on June 1st, 2017, 11 days after the initial attack, Zulfarhan was rushed to the hospital by the same 2 cadets. He arrived unconscious with burns covering nearly 80% of his body. Doctors attempted to resuscitate him twice. Zulfarhan Osman Zulkarnain was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. He was found to be tortured by 19 fellow cadet officers. The severity of Zulfarhan's injuries made it clear that this was no ordinary incident. The hospital immediately alerted the police, who began investigating the circumstances surrounding the naval cadet's death. Within hours, they turned their attention to the Jabat hostel at UPNM. In total, 36 students were called in for questioning. Of them, 19 were eventually charged, 5 with murder and 14 with abetting. The 6 main individuals who were charged, 5 for murder and 1 for abetting, are Muhammad Akmal Zuhairi Azmal, Muhammad Azamuddin Matsofi, Muhammad Najib Muhammad Razi, Muhammad Afif Najmuddin Azahad, Muhammad Shobrin Sabri, Abdul Hakim Muhammad Ali, charged for abetment and said to have instructed others to hurt Zulfarhan. The forensic examination painted a horrific picture of sustained cruelty. A total of 90 burn wounds were found across Zulfarhan's body: arms, shoulders, torso, legs, and private parts, resulting in scalding burns covering 80% of his body. Of these, 29 were third-degree burns, exposing wet muscle tissue and bleeding, which are considered lethal even with medical care. Additional injuries included bruises, notably around his left eye and scalp, fractures to his left rib, and multiple cuts, which really demonstrates the prolonged nature of the assault. The burns directly caused fatal complications, including heart swelling and kidney failure. When news broke, Malaysia erupted. Online, the hashtag Justice for Zulfarhan trended within hours. Many condemned the abusers and even bystanders, cadets who shared the same dormitory but looked the other way. One netizen wrote, "Why did so many participate in torturing him to death? Why did they think a laptop was worth being executed over? I know groupthink is a thing, but this is a whole other level of the phenomenon." Others connected Zulfarhan's death to a wider pattern of hazing and bullying in schools, universities, and even national institutions. The anger was not confined to online communities. Editorials demanded accountability from UPNM. The public even demanded punishment for the BOMO who accused Zulfarhan of stealing the laptop. Parents across the country asked the same question. If such abuse could happen inside a university where order and discipline were the cornerstone, what protection did ordinary students have? What followed in court was a long and painful process detailing the days that Zulfarhan endured. Prosecutors argued that the accused had tortured Zulfarhan with deliberate intent to cause grievous injury. With 90 burn wounds inflicted by a scalding iron and no attempt to seek proper medical help, they insisted the severity of the abuse met the legal threshold for murder. On the other hand, defense lawyers pleaded for mercy. They painted their clients as repentant youths and cited their academic achievements and remorse. And then there was a matter of the letter. During the trial, it came to light that one of Zulfarhan's friends, Muhammad Aiman Alfa Asmadi Afandi, had written a desperate handwritten plea on May 25, 2017. He placed it at the gates of the Tuanku Mizan Military Hospital and later under the door of a trainer's office. Afraid his identity would be unknown, he wrote that letter anonymously. The letter begged authorities to ambush room 410, Block Satria, because someone sick really needs immediate treatment. Zulfarhan was lying inside that room, his body blistered and blackened from the torture. But nobody came. Whether the letter was ignored, misplaced, or dismissed as a hoax, we'll never know. What is clear is that even when someone tried to intervene, the system failed to act. Zulfarhan remained in that room, and just days later, he was gone. On 2nd November 2021, the Kuala Lumpur High Court delivered its first verdict. The 6 former UPNM cadets were found guilty of culpable homicide not amounting to murder and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Another 13 cadets who were involved in causing harm received 3 years each. A video soon surfaced showing some of the accused smiling and laughing in court after they had initially escaped the death penalty. That image spread quickly online and left many Malaysians furious, with people questioning whether the cadets felt any genuine remorse. But the story didn't end there. On 23 July 2024, the Court of Appeal shocked the nation when it reinstated murder charges under Section 302 of the Penal Code. The judges described the case as among the rarest of the rare, pointing to the 90 iron burn marks on Zulfarhan's body as proof of deliberate cruelty. The 13 accomplices also saw their sentences increase from 3 years to 4 years in prison. All 6 of the main perpetrators were sentenced to death by hanging. And then came another twist. On 28 February 2025, on appeal, the federal court stepped in and overturned the death sentences. The judges ruled that while the 6 main men had intentionally caused serious injury, the prosecution had not proven beyond reasonable doubt that they had intended for Zulfarhan to die. The charges were once again reduced to culpable homicide and the 18-year sentences were reinstated. Because their jail terms were backdated to their arrest in 2017, the 6 could be released as early as 2029 with good behaviour, just 12 years served in total. Zulfarhan's parents faced the court's final verdict with quiet heartbreak. His mother, Madam Hawa, was seen in prayer as the judges spared the 6 cadets the death penalty, a decision she described as painful, yet one she had to accept. For years, she and her husband, Zulkarnain Idros, sat through every hearing in hopes of justice. They often appeared in court wearing t-shirts with the words "Say no to bullying" and "Justice for Farhan." But now, with the case closed, they carry not exactly closure, but the lasting wound of a son taken too soon. When we look back at Zulfarhan's story, yes, it is first and foremost about the 6 who tortured him and the 13 who helped restrain him. But it's also about the people who stood by and failed him. A doctor who saw the severity of his burns but allowed him to walk out of the clinic because Zulfarhan insisted he would manage with dressing. University leaders who may have received warnings, including that desperate letter left at the hospital gates and slipped under a trainer's door, but never acted. And perhaps most painfully, the batchmates, his own peers, who saw the injuries, heard the cries, and chose silence over intervention. This is not just an individual failure. It's a reflection of a larger culture of hazing and institutional bullying, a culture where toughness is valued above compassion, where loyalty to a group outweighs the duty to protect another human being. It's a culture that tells young men to stay quiet because speaking up might make them the next target. And the question lingers, have things really changed in the last 8 years? Cases of bullying, hazing, and cover-ups continue to surface. Each time there's public outrage, promises of reform, and a call for accountability. And yet the cycle repeats. So what can be done? Some suggest stricter monitoring, independent channels for reporting abuse and harsher punishment for hazing. Others argue for deeper cultural change, teaching empathy and accountability alongside discipline and honor. It's not enough to turn off the lights at midnight or to demand perfect salutes if students are too afraid to speak up when someone is being beaten in the room next door. Zulfarhan's story is a tragedy, but it's also a warning. Until Malaysia and the rest of the world confronts the systems that enable silence, until students believe they can seek help without fear, and until leaders place humanity above hierarchy, more parents will worry and more young lives will remain at risk. This was Side Notes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.